Hello. Nice to see everybody here today. It's really fun to be a part of this. I actually want to take all of your classes, if that's okay. I found it really exciting to hear about what people are teaching and what they're doing here at the university. My name is John Davis, and I am a professor of practice here at the Lundquist College of Business, teaching sustainability. In particular, I head up the Center for Sustainable Business Practices. And my interest in the Olympics covers a number of different areas. I look at the Olympics through the value of the games themselves. What do the games stand for as a vehicle, not only for social and economic good, but also environmental good, and how do we improve it in many areas? But beyond that, also looking at the games as a global force that draws communities together. My own background on this is I've spent years doing writing, publishing about the Olympics. Curious, as much as my colleagues here have been, around sponsorship and the role of host cities in the Olympic Games and what the economics behind that are and why we do that. And then looking at it through the lens of what does it mean for the communities themselves as they're getting involved in the Olympics. So I want to share a bit of that with you. And because my background in sustainability and where I spent my focus, you'll see that I'm going to spend much of my time focusing on three different dimensions. The look at the economic, the environmental, and the social aspects of the games themselves. And you'll note at the center, value. And I call value at the center here because I'm talking about value in the context of Olympic stories. And through the other speakers we've already heard today, you've heard a number of stories already. I'd like to share a few with you because I think those are at the heart of what drive the ultimate interest in today, the modern Olympics around the world. So let me begin and share with you some that you may be familiar with. And I'll tie a couple of them loosely to the framework here, but also tell you more about each of these athletes. So in the upper left, you see Fred Lors. For those of you who know the Olympic history, Fred Lors was the won first place, you could say, in the 1904 St. Louis Olympics. He crossed the finish line first, I should say. But he was not awarded the gold medal because, as it turns out, he rode in a car for 11 miles of the race, which is not necessarily a great example of what you call integrity. However, to hear more about the story, you have to understand the background to this. He was stripped of his amateur status and was banned from competition for life. But he went off to appeal this and said, I was not there to win the gold medal. I was not there to claim it from the victory stand. I was ill during the race, and I decided to ride in a car until I could recover, and then in honor of the games themselves, continued on in finishing the race, never with any intent to actually claim the gold medal. The appeal was won, and he was reinstated as an amateur athlete. He was not given the gold medal, so no worries about that there. But he became sort of an example of the pros and cons of some of the athletic stories we get around the Olympics. Now, at that time, the St. Louis Olympics were not known as a harbinger of really great economic sense. They were an economic disaster for the games. They were held at the same time as the World's Fair, and the World's Fair took a lot of the energy. The games themselves were chaotic, and he didn't contribute in any meaningful way to adding to the economic virtues of that Olympic Games. But let me shift to the next story. On the right side, if you take a look at environmental, and there's Hannah Mills, and she is a more recent athlete from the 2012 through 2020 Olympic Games, champion sailor, silver medalist in 2012, gold in each of the subsequent games in sailing, and has become a champion of the plastics movement. In particular, heads up the Plastics Pledge, which is designed to eradicate plastics in her sport, and is using her platform as an Olympic athlete in order to advance recognition of the environmental impact of the games, and in particular her sport around plastics and the microplastics in the world. And so you look at that and say, okay, well, that's a good story there. Here's somebody who's actually trying to use her sport as a vehicle to raise awareness about a very trying issue as it pertains to the environment. The next story below is one of my favorite stories across the Olympics, and it's Yusra Mardini. If you know her story, in 2015, she and her sister were fleeing from Syria because of the conflict there, and were in a boat that had 20 other people in it, got subsumed in waters, and in order to help save the boat, she jumped into the water and pulled the boat to safety, but it wasn't just a few minutes. She did it for 3.5 hours in treacherous waters, saving the rest of the people on the boat, and it became a remarkable story. As an athlete, she competed on the refugee team in the Olympics as a really good butterfly swimmer. She did not win, but she did win her first heat, which further raised visibility for her as well. And her story to me is particularly poignant because after retiring in 2023, she started the Yusra Mardini Foundation, which is designed to raise the visibility of refugee athletes and help support them in their cause to compete in the games as well. So those three are just examples of athletes whose contribution to the games helps raise the visibility. And that visibility, those stories are really important because the overall modern games depends on this virtual cycle of the athletes attracting fans, fans attract the media attracts sponsors, and it builds the modern ecosystem, which is where I spend part of my time thinking about the games themselves. So let's advance this a bit to the bigger picture. Zoom out from the athlete to the impact in each of these areas of economic, environment, and social in particular. And on the economic side, I'll look at two dimensions, the host cities and the sponsors. So in the host cities, why do they do this? Fairly self-evident. It's a shiny object. It helps raise the visibility of the city on the global stage. They want that recognition. It's a desirable thing in order to boost reputation. It brings people into the city, and hopefully that's sustained over time. That has not actually been proven time and again, but it is something that they hope for. The economic logic behind the persuasion that goes into defending why they would bid for the Olympics is suspect. In the modern era, only 2 Olympics that we can document have proven to have a profitable outcome. Los Angeles in 1984, and it looks like Paris in 2024. And that's partly because they reused existing venues. It was a smart model, and we're able to take those facilities rather than building anew and demonstrate that you could instead have a verifiable economic outcome of the games that was far more positive than we've seen before, whereas some others, as you know, have been fairly economically questionable. On the sponsor side, and I owe a great allegiance to colleague Bettina Cornwell, who's written more about this than anybody. But when you look at what the role of sponsors are in the Olympics, they do it as well to raise visibility. If you can associate your brand to the Olympic Games, you get that Olympic halo effect. But you'll note up here I say, patience is a virtue, urgency isn't. So if you invest in the Olympics as a one-time effort, the likelihood of you gaining anything as a sponsor out of that is remote at best. It's expensive, doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you look at the Visas, the Samsungs, the Coca-Colas who've done it over multiple Olympiads, it begins to associate their brand with the games in a more positive way. But I love Bettina's framing of this, which is you have to think about it in the context of return on purpose as opposed to return on investment, because it's much more aligned around, does it fit with the values of the brand? Does the brand itself fit with the values of the Olympics? I think that's the way you've got to look at this. Let's flip to the environmental side. The current structure and the model for the Olympic Games is that you have multiple host cities. So each summer games, each winter games moves to a new location. We know that. That's the way it's been for quite some time. On the environment, that creates a challenge because that produces anywhere from 2 to 4.5 million tons of carbon emissions in the atmosphere because of the new facilities construction. One of my areas of interest is, should there be a permanent host in these? It's controversial, but it's a question we have to ask. Should there be a permanent host that would reduce the amount of carbon emissions from the games because you would not depend so much on that new construction of the new stadium? So something to consider there as well. Finally, on the social dimensions, the games themselves are designed to do a couple things, right? On the local level, boost that pride, boost civic pride. And when the games actually occur in the local market or in that nation, it does end up creating a groundswell of support. The run-up to it is less certain because oftentimes what happens as the games begin to build out, what you'll see is a fair amount of people upset about the disruption to their lives because there's a change in the way the everyday life that they've gotten used to is unfolding as the games get prepared. But the good news is once the games do unfold, as I said, it starts to raise civic pride. The other piece to that is it accelerates infrastructure. So any improvements that the city have been trying to make over time gets accelerated rather dramatically, more often than not, during the context of this, during the development of the games. At the same time, there are real issues around displacement, which we've seen in Beijing, we saw it in London, we saw it in Rio, we saw it in Paris as well, where you see vulnerable populations being moved out. The question is that sustainable? I think arguably, or not arguably, it really isn't. It's not a smart way to kind of build out the games in the future. On the global side, the games are a vehicle for bringing together over 200 countries and territories. And you've got a remarkably diverse population coming into the games, which is exciting. And you see that time and time again. And that's part of my love of the games as well, is just to see this sheer diversity of talent that come from all over the world to compete. And as we've heard already from some other speakers, it is also a platform that elevates other messages, protests, people in the games themselves or outside of the games who see it as a stage in which they can elevate their message. Whether that message is good or bad, the games become a vehicle for that. So each of these areas, the economic, environmental, and social dimensions of the games, are the areas that I'm keenly interested in as well. And I think it's important for us as we think about what the future of the Olympics is how we can continue to get better, stronger, and more effective in the execution of the games. Thanks very much.